The gravy boat shattered when it hit the dining room floor. Not because anyone threw it. Not because of any dramatic gesture or deliberate act. It slipped from my daughter-in-law Rebecca's hands at the exact moment she said the words. The words she had clearly been planning to say all evening, possibly longer. And the sound of it breaking against the hardwood was so perfectly timed with the silence that followed that for one strange second the whole table just stared at the mess on the floor instead of at each other. Then everyone looked at me. I was 34 years old, sitting at the head of my own Thanksgiving table in the house I had lived in for 9 years, holding a glass of sparkling water with both hands, and I was smiling. Not the polite kind of smile. Not the frozen kind people wear when they are managing shock in public. A real one. Because Rebecca had just told my entire family that my husband David was having an affair with a woman named Claire Sutton, who worked at his architecture firm in downtown Nashville. And I had known about Claire Sutton for exactly 2 years, 1 month, and 11 days. Let me tell you about the Thanksgiving that almost destroyed my family before I tell you about the one that actually saved it. I need to go back 2 years first. Back to Tuesday evening in October. When I came home from a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a pediatric occupational therapist and found David's laptop open on the kitchen counter, showing an email thread he had forgotten to close, I almost didn't read it. That sounds strange, I know. Most people would say they couldn't help themselves. But the truth is, I stood in front of that screen for a full 30 seconds, making an active choice. I could close the laptop, make dinner, and continue the life I had been living. Or I could read what was on the screen. I read it. 3 emails. Not long ones, but enough. Enough to understand that David and Claire Sutton had been seeing each other for at least 4 months at that point. Enough to understand it was not casual. The language was specific and warm and careless in the way people are careless when they believe they are not being observed. Enough to understand that my husband of 7 years had built something real with someone else while I worked 12-hour shifts and came home exhausted, and trusted him the way you trust people you have chosen to build your life around. I closed the laptop. I made dinner. David came home at 7:30, and we ate together at the kitchen table and talked about his project deadline, my difficult patient that week, and whether we should drive to his parents for Christmas or fly. Ordinary conversation. The kind that fills marriages so completely you sometimes forget to check what's underneath it. He had no idea I knew. I spent 3 days deciding what to do. Not 3 days of crying. Not 3 days of confronting or accusing or falling apart. 3 days of thinking, which is different and which I have always been better at than most people give me credit for. I am a quiet person. I have been quiet my entire life. Not because I have nothing to say, but because I have learned that most situations reveal themselves more completely if you wait long enough. What I decided after 3 days was this. I would not confront David immediately. Not because I was afraid of the conversation, because I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it. So I watched. Quietly. Carefully. The way I had always done things. And over the following weeks and months, the picture became clearer. David Mitchell was 36 years old and genuinely talented at his work. He designed buildings that people actually wanted to be inside. Spaces with light and proportion, and the particular quality of places that feel intentional without feeling cold. He had won 2 regional awards in 5 years. His firm respected him. His clients trusted him. He was also someone who had never been particularly good at being alone with difficult feelings. I understood that about David early in our relationship. He grew up in a family where emotions were managed through activity, through doing, building, moving forward. His father was the same way, a good man who expressed love through projects rather than conversation. David had inherited that quality entirely. It made him extraordinary at his work. It made him fragile in ways he didn't fully recognize in himself. When our marriage hit a difficult stretch 3 years earlier, the miscarriage, the long recovery, the months of quiet grief that neither of us quite knew how to navigate together, David had responded by working more, later hours, more projects, more forward motion as a substitute for sitting still with something painful. I had responded by going inward, processing slowly, waiting for the ground to feel solid again before I move. We had handled the same grief in completely opposite directions, and somewhere in that distance, Claire Sutton had appeared. I don't say this to excuse what David did. There is no excuse for it. Betrayal is betrayal regardless of the circumstances that create the vulnerability for it. But I am a person who has always believed that understanding something fully is more important than reacting to it quickly. And over those 2 years of watching and thinking, I came to understand my marriage with a clarity I had never had before, including its weaknesses, including my own contribution to them, including exactly what I wanted to do about all of it. What I wanted was not what anyone expected. 6 months after I found the emails, I called a therapist. Not couples therapy, individual therapy. A woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, who worked out of a small office in East Nashville, had the particular quality of someone who listened without rushing to fill the silence. I told her everything in the first session, the emails. The decision was not to confront David immediately. The 2 years I was planning to give myself to understand what I actually wanted before I made any permanent decisions. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She also didn't tell me I was right. She asked me one question that I have thought about almost every day since. What are you most afraid of finding out? I sat with that for a long time before answering. But I stayed too long for the wrong reasons, I said finally. She nodded slowly. And what would the right reasons look like? That question took me the rest of the year to answer. In the meantime, I continued living my life with a particular kind of dual awareness that I imagine sounds impossible to people who haven't experienced it. On the surface, my marriage, my work, my friendships, my family dinners, my ordinary Tennessee life. Underneath, a quiet, ongoing assessment of everything. What was real? What was the performance? What I genuinely valued and what I had simply gotten used to. I also began preparing. Not dramatically, not vengefully. Practically. The way my mother had always taught me to approach difficult situations. With information, with documentation, with the understanding that knowledge is the only thing that cannot be taken from you once you have it. I opened a personal savings account that David didn't know about. Not hidden in any sinister way. Simply separate. Mine. I consulted a family law attorney named Patricia Graves, who had an office in Brentwood and who charged $300 an hour and was worth every penny, because she explained to me in very clear language exactly what my rights were and exactly what I would need if I decided to move forward with divorce proceedings. I documented everything I could document, not obsessively, carefully. The kind of care that feels like protection rather than surveillance. And I kept going to Dr. Okafor every 2 weeks, asking myself the same question in different forms. What do I actually want? The answer changed several times over those 2 years. At first, I wanted to leave immediately. Then I wanted to stay and fight for the marriage. Then I wanted to understand whether there was a marriage worth fighting for. Then I wanted to stop making decisions based on fear of either outcome and start making them based on something more honest. By the time Rebecca dropped that gravy boat, I had my answer. I had known it for 3 months. Rebecca was my brother-in-law Marcus's wife. Marcus was David's younger brother by 4 years. They had married 2 years earlier in a large wedding at a venue outside Chattanooga that cost more than our first car and featured a 7-piece band and a photo booth that produced novelty Polaroids with their initials printed on the border. Rebecca was 31, pretty in an aggressive way, and had the particular quality of someone who had been the most interesting person in every room she had previously occupied and found the adjustment to new rooms difficult. She was not unintelligent. She was, however, someone who confused the awareness of other people's business with power over it. She and I had never been close, not because of any specific conflict, simply because we were different in the ways that make closeness unlikely. She liked surfaces, and I liked depth. She liked noise, and I liked quiet. She communicated through implication, and I communicated through directness when I communicated at all. David's parents were Margaret and Robert Mitchell. Margaret was 68, warm and practical in equal measure, the kind of woman who expressed love through food and showed concern through action. Robert was 70, retired from a career in civil engineering, quietly perceptive in the way men sometimes are when they have spent decades listening more than talking. I had always loved David's parents genuinely. They were coming to our house for Thanksgiving. David's family. Margaret, Robert, Marcus, Rebecca, and David's Aunt Carol, who was visiting from Atlanta. My own family was spending the holiday with my sister in Memphis this year, so it was exclusively the Mitchell family at our table. 8 people, including David and me. I had been cooking since Tuesday. Not because I was performing normalcy, because I genuinely liked to cook and Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. And I had decided months earlier that whatever was going to happen with my marriage, It was not going to happen on Thanksgiving in front of David's elderly parents. That was a boundary I had drawn clearly in my own mind. Rebecca, it turned out, had drawn different plans. The day itself started well. Margaret arrived first with 2 pies and immediately took over the kitchen in the gentle, unstoppable way she always did, rearranging things slightly without asking and improving everything without realizing she was doing it. Robert shook David's hand and hugged me and settled into the armchair in the living room with the particular contentment of a man who has learned that the best position at any family gathering is slightly removed from the main action. Marcus and Rebecca arrived 40 minutes later. Rebecca walked in with a bottle of wine and a smile that was slightly too wide for the occasion. I noticed it immediately, but said nothing. She kissed Margaret's cheek, hugged David, made a comment about the house smelling wonderful, and then found her way to the kitchen, where she offered to help in the specific way people offer to help when they have no intention of actually helping and simply want to be in the center of things. I gave her the green beans. The afternoon moved in the particular rhythm of large family gatherings. Conversation rising and falling across different rooms. Football on the television nobody was actually watching. Children's voices from the neighborhood outside drifting in through the kitchen window. The smell of roasting turkey filling every corner of the house with the particular warmth that only happens on days the whole country is doing the same thing at the same time. David was quieter than usual. I noticed. I had been noticing David for 2 years with the particular attention of someone who is gathering information. He had been quieter in general for the past 3 months. More careful, more present in the specific way people become present when they are managing guilt. Something had shifted in him around August. I didn't know exactly what, but I had my theory. We sat down to dinner at 4 o'clock. The table looked beautiful. Margaret had brought her mother's linen tablecloth, which came out only for major occasions. Robert said grace in the straightforward way he always did. Brief, genuine, no performance. We passed dishes and poured wine, and the conversation found its comfortable Thanksgiving rhythm. I was watching Rebecca. Not obviously, just aware. She had refilled her wine glass twice during the appetizer hour, and she had the particular bright-eyed quality of someone who has decided that today is the day something gets said. I had been in enough difficult situations to recognize when one was approaching. I took a quiet sip of my sparkling water and waited. It happened between the main course and dessert. The turkey had been cleared. The side dishes were mostly empty. Margaret was talking about her garden. Robert was asking Marcus about a project at work. David was cutting himself a second piece of cornbread and not looking at anyone in particular. Rebecca set down her wine glass. I think, she said, in the particular voice people use when they have rehearsed an opening line, that we should talk about something. The table didn't go immediately silent. It took a few seconds. Conversations finishing their sentences, forks completing their journeys to plates. Then Margaret looked toward her. What's that, sweetheart? Rebecca looked directly at me. I think Anna deserves to know something that everyone at this table has apparently decided to pretend isn't happening. The silence arrived completely now. David's hand stopped moving. Robert's expression became very still. Marcus said, quietly and urgently, Rebecca. She ignored him. David has been seeing someone from his firm. Rebecca said, looking at me with the particular expression of someone delivering news they have convinced themselves is a gift. Her name is Claire Sutton. It's been going on for over 2 years. That was the moment the gravy boat slipped. It hit the floor and shattered, and the sound filled the room like punctuation. And I sat at the head of my own Thanksgiving table, holding my sparkling water with both hands, and I smiled. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then everyone began speaking at once. Margaret said David's name in a voice I had never heard from her before. Low and shocked and genuinely wounded. Robert said nothing, but the quality of his stillness changed completely. Marcus grabbed Rebecca's arm and said her name sharply, and she shook him off. David pushed back from the table, stood up, and said my name, and I held up one hand gently, and he stopped. One hand. He stopped immediately. That told me something important. Anna, David said. His voice had the particular sound of a man who has just watched something he was dreading finally arrive. I need to. Sit down, David.
I said quietly. He sat. Rebecca was watching me with an expression that had begun as righteous and was now becoming uncertain. She had expected tears. Collapse. The particular dramatic unraveling that makes a person feel justified in having caused it. She had not expected stillness. Rebecca, I said calmly, how long have you known? She blinked. About 4 months. I saw them together at a restaurant in 4 months, I said. I nodded slowly. And you chose Thanksgiving dinner to mention it. Her chin lifted slightly. I thought you deserved to know. You thought, I said gently, that this was the most useful moment. The distinction landed. Marcus looked at his wife with an expression that suggested this was a conversation they would be having privately for quite some time. Margaret had one hand pressed against her mouth. Robert had placed his napkin on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man deciding how to handle something he had not anticipated. David was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not relief, not even fear. Something closer to recognition. Like a man who has been living with a secret for 2 years and has just realized for the first time that the person he kept it from may have known all along. I set my sparkling water down carefully. I said to the table, that Margaret and Robert should have dessert. Margaret looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood up quietly and began collecting plates. That was Margaret Mitchell in her entirety. A woman who understood that some situations required action rather than commentary, and that the most useful action available to her in that moment was maintaining the dignity of her own table. Robert stood and helped her without a word. Marcus stood as well, pulling Rebecca up by the arm with the firm, quiet authority of a man who understood he owed his sister-in-law a significant apology. Rebecca went with him into the living room without arguing, which told me the uncertainty in her expression had finished becoming something else entirely. Aunt Carol, who was 81 and had the magnificent social confidence of someone who had outlived most of the people whose opinions she had ever cared about, refilled her wine glass, selected a dinner roll, and remained seated at the table with the peaceful composure of a woman watching something interesting unfold. That left David and me. He was still sitting across the table, looking at me. How long have you known? He asked. 2 years, I said. 1 month. 11 days. The color left his face so completely that it was almost remarkable. Anna, I found your laptop open, I said. October. 2 years ago. An email thread. He closed his eyes. I made a decision that night, I continued. Not to confront you immediately. To understand what I was dealing with first. He opened his eyes. You have known for 2 years. Yes, and you didn't. He stopped. Started again. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about Dr. Okafor's question. What are you most afraid of finding out? Because I needed to understand what I wanted, I said, before I decided anything permanent. David looked at the table for a long moment, at his hands, at the empty wine glass beside his plate. And now, he asked quietly, now I know. He looked up at me. I've been seeing Patricia Graves, I said. She's a family law attorney in Brentwood. We've been working together for 18 months. The recognition in David's face deepened into something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite relief and was probably both simultaneously. I have my own accounts, I continued. I have documentation. I have a very clear understanding of my rights and my options. I paused. I also have a very clear understanding of what I want. David waited. I looked at my husband across the Thanksgiving table in the house we had shared for 9 years. I want to know if it's over, I said. Claire Sutton. I want to know if you ended it. He was very still. 3 months ago, he said quietly. August. My theory had been correct. Why? He looked at his hands again. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, because I finally understood what I was losing. The dining room was very quiet around us. From the kitchen, I could hear Margaret moving carefully. From the living room, the low sound of Marcus's voice and Rebecca's responses. That's not enough, I said. I know. Understanding what you're losing is not the same as understanding what you did. I know that too. I looked at him carefully. At the man I had married at 27 in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard with 30 people and a cake my mother made herself. At the man who had held my hand through the miscarriage and cried in the hospital parking garage afterward when he thought I couldn't see him. At the man who had also, while I recovered from that loss, turned toward someone else instead of toward me. People are not simple. That is the hardest thing to hold on to when someone hurts you. They are not simply good or simply bad. They are complicated and frightened and capable of both the best and worst things simultaneously. Understanding that didn't make what David did acceptable, but it made it human. And I had spent 2 years deciding whether I could live with the human version of him. I stood up from the table. "I'm going to serve dessert," I said. David stared at me. We need to talk about this." "We will," I said. "Not tonight. Tonight your parents are in my kitchen, and your aunt is finishing her wine, and it is Thanksgiving." I looked at him steadily. "We will talk. Everything will be addressed. Patricia Graves has prepared documents that will need to be reviewed by your attorney. All of that is coming." He nodded slowly. "But right now," I said, "I'm going to slice Margaret's pie." I walked into the kitchen. Margaret was standing at the counter with her back to me. She turned when she heard me come in. Her eyes were wet. "Anna," she said. "I'm okay," I told her. She crossed the kitchen and hugged me. Not lightly. The way mothers hug when they are apologizing for something their children have done, and know the apology is insufficient, but offer it anyway because it is all they have. I hugged her back. "He ended it," I said quietly against her shoulder. She pulled back and looked at me. "3 months ago," I said. "I need you to know that." Margaret looked at me for a long moment, with the complicated expression of a mother processing simultaneous grief. For her son's failure, for my pain, for the marriage she had watched and loved for 7 years. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to make a permanent decision from a place of anger." I picked up the pie server. "I've had 2 years to think about this. I don't need to decide everything tonight." Margaret watched me slice the first piece of pie with steady hands. "You are," she said quietly, "an extraordinary young woman. Your son made it necessary," I said. That surprised a laugh out of her. Startled, genuine, slightly tearful. Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said very simply, "I'm sorry, Anna." "Thank you, Robert." He nodded once, came and took the stack of dessert plates from the counter without being asked, and carried them to the dining room. Practical love. The Mitchell family language. Rebecca apologized before she left. Not a long apology. Not a particularly graceful one, but genuine. The specific genuineness of someone who had done something they had convinced themselves was righteous, and had spent the past 2 hours understanding it was actually something else. "I thought I was helping," she said at the door. "I know," I told her. "I didn't think about." She stopped. "I didn't think. No," I agreed. "But you didn't know I already knew. So I understand the impulse." She looked at me with an expression I recognized. The particular look of someone recalibrating their understanding of another person entirely. "I'm sorry," she said again. More simply this time. "Take care of your marriage." I told her gently. "That's the most useful thing you can do right now." She nodded. Marcus took her hand, and they walked to their car without looking back. Aunt Carol left shortly after with the peaceful, unhurried manner of someone who had thoroughly enjoyed a complicated evening and intended to think about it fondly for some time. Margaret hugged me at the door for a long time before she and Robert left. Robert shook my hand, held it for a moment longer than a handshake required. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "you'll be all right." "I know," I told him, and I meant it. David and I sat at the kitchen table after everyone left. The house was quiet around us in the particular way houses are quiet after they have been full of people. Not empty exactly, just returned to itself. The dishes were stacked beside the sink. The leftover turkey was wrapped in the refrigerator. Aunt Carol's wineglass was still on the dining room table. We sat across from each other the way we had sat across from each other for 7 years. Familiar, adjacent two people who had built a shared language out of ordinary days. "I need to ask you something," I said. David waited. "When you ended it in August." What made you do it then? He was quiet for a moment. I was at a work event. Recognition dinner for the Harrison Project. He looked at his hands. They gave me an award, and I stood there holding this thing, and the first person I wanted to call was you. He paused. Not her. You. I sat with that. That's when I knew, he said. That I'd been an idiot in the most complete possible way. Yes, I said. You had been. He nodded. I don't know if I can fix this, he said. I don't know if you want me to try. I don't know either, I said honestly. What do you need? I thought about Dr. Okafor, about Patricia Graves, about 18 months of preparation and 2 years of watching, and the particular exhausting clarity that arrives when you have thought about something long enough to see it from every angle. I need you to go to therapy, I said, individually. Not couples therapy, your own therapist, someone you choose and commit to for at least 6 months before we discuss anything else. He nodded immediately. Okay, I need you to be honest with me from this point forward. About everything. Not managed honesty. Not curated honesty. Actual honesty. Okay, and I need time, I said. I've had 2 years of thinking. You've had one evening. We are not in the same place. I need you to understand that and not rush me. David looked at me across the kitchen table. Anna, he said quietly. Can I ask you something? Yes, why didn't you leave? 2 years ago, when you found the emails. Why did you stay? I thought about that question for a long time before answering, because the honest answer was complicated, and I wanted to give him the honest one. Because leaving immediately would have been reacting, I said, and I didn't want to make the most important decision of my life from a place of pure reaction. I paused. I wanted to know what I actually wanted, not what the pain wanted. He was very still. And I continued quietly, wanted to know who you really were, not who I assumed you were, not who you are, who you actually were when things got hard. And I looked at him. I'm still deciding, I said. That was 18 months ago. David found a therapist the following week, a man named Gregory Walsh, who worked out of an office in Midtown, and whom David has now been seeing every Thursday for 18 months without missing a single appointment. I stayed in my sessions with Dr. Okafor. We did not rush. We had the hard conversations that we should have had 3 years earlier after the miscarriage. The ones about grief and distance, and the particular ways two people can occupy the same house while slowly becoming strangers to each other. Those conversations were not comfortable. They were not quick. They required both of us to say things we had never said and hear things we had never been willing to hear. Patricia Graves kept my file open. I did not close it. Some days I thought we would make it. Other days I was less certain. But I had promised myself 2 years earlier that I would not make permanent decisions from temporary emotional states, and I intended to keep that promise. What I can tell you today is this. I am 35 years old, and I am still in my house in Nashville, and David is still in it with me, and we are still in the particular slow, difficult work of understanding whether what remains between us is worth rebuilding. I don't know the ending yet, but I know something more important than the ending. I know that I handled every part of this on my own terms. I gathered information before I reacted. I prepared before I moved. I made decisions from a place of clarity rather than panic. I protected myself legally and financially and emotionally before a single conversation about any of it happened publicly. Rebecca, dropping that gravy boat changed nothing that I had not already prepared for. That is what I want women who are in quiet pain to understand. You do not have to react immediately to hurt well. You do not have to perform your grief on someone else's timeline. You do not have to make permanent decisions in the first devastating hours of discovering something that breaks your heart. You are allowed to take time. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to prepare. And you are allowed to sit at the head of your own Thanksgiving table, holding sparkling water in both hands and smile. Not because nothing hurts, but because you are the only person in the room who knows exactly how prepared you already are. Quiet women are not passive women. They are simply women who understand that the most powerful move is almost never the fastest one. If this story meant something to you today, if you have ever sat with a painful truth longer than anyone around you understood, I hope you carry this forward. Take your time. Prepare carefully. And trust yourself to know when you are ready. Thank you for being here with me today.